I mentioned that with components, the data property must be a function and not an object as we're used to. I have opened up an example of a component which contains a button. When clicking it, I want to increase a data property, which I haven't added yet. Now I want to show you why adding an object for the data property won't work, so I'll just go ahead and add an object. And the data property is going to be named counter with an initial value of 0. So if I open up the browser's console, clear it, and then run the code again, we can see that Vue issues a warning that the property must contain a function and that the component doesn't work either. Alright, so that clearly didn't work. Let's change the property to be a function instead then. So let's cut this and make it a function and return this object that I just cut instead, like that, and run the code. Now we'll see that the component actually works. But let's try to move the object out of the component and into a variable. So this part I'll cut once again, return data, and at the top I'll add a data variable with this object. Let's now run the code again. It seems to still work, doesn't it? But let's see what happens if I add the component to the page a few more times. So in the template I'll duplicate this tag 2 times, so we have it 3 times, and run the code. And now let's see what happens if I click one of the buttons now. Notice how all of the numbers on the buttons change. This is because all 3 instances of the components share the same data object. Because when Vue invokes the function to retrieve the object, I return a reference to the same data object each time. This is what Vue tries to prevent by having us return an object within a function. In this case, I just work my way around it just to show you the problem. Let's now fix it by returning a new object within the function so that every time it's called, a fresh object is returned. This will mean that each component instance is self-contained as it should be and will contain its own internal states. So once again, cut this object, delete this variable, and return it here instead. And now I'll try to click the buttons. And this verifies that it now works as intended. So requiring that the data property contains a function is really just a precaution that Vue takes for us to prevent us from messing up and doing bad things where components do not have their own state. And unless you hack around it, Vue will catch you making the mistake. So to summarize, the data property should be a function in the context of components, and this function should always return a fresh object.